Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's Staying Sane. I'm Jay, and my partner in crime, Hussein. Thanks for
Yeah.
joining
Hi,
us.
everyone. Yes. Hello.
Ah, so Hussein, you wanna kick us off?
You can go ahead. I will
I can
join.
go.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we just see there was an article here I was looking at earlier on the new Pope Leo. Interestingly, in one of his very first audiences, he's chosen to meet with the head of the ultra-conservative Catholic group Opus Dei, which is a little bit unnerving for those of us in the secular community that he would choose to meet with somebody from such a fundamentalist, let's be honest,
Mm.
fundamentalist organization. And Opus Dei includes many prominent Catholics in Washington, particularly right wings who hold significant power, especially on the US Supreme Court, which is now mostly composed of ultra conservative Catholics. Um, one quote here in the article I read from a professor says Leo understands the DNA of conservatism, but he comes from a centrist moderate tradition. He's very progressive on issues like immigration and refugees. However, the article goes on, he is likely to disappoint some liberals around the issue of women in the church, abortion, and gender. So no big surprise there that that he's not going to tackle any of the big grenades. Says ultra conservatives in the church will also be forced to contend that Leo is relatively young and full of energy, and he's likely to outlast the traditionalists who will probably die off before the end of his tenure, making the church transition more and more to a much more liberal church as some of these older diehard conservatives die off. I'm reminded of a quote um, Professor Greg Dawes, who's been on our podcast before, in one of his books. And Greg was himself; he's a professor of philosophy and religion. He was also a Catholic priest in his earlier days. And in one of his books, I believe it was Max Planck, he has a quote from Planck says, "Like the church." Science doesn't progress because of ideas. Science progresses, and the church will progress because the old guard dies off. So if Leo can outlast some of these traditionalists and like Francis sack the cardinalate with younger reformers and liberals, the church might actually stand a chance of seeing some significant reforms in the next generation. So and then moving on, there was a big headline on BBC that popped up today.
Mm.
Um, that France, the UK, and Canada um, have condemned the situation in Palestine right now. The title, so let me read this quote. It seems that Israel's credit has gone, at least as far as France, United Kingdom, and Canada are concerned. Together, these three governments say, quote, they strongly oppose the expansion of Israel's military operations in Gaza, adding the level of human suffering in Gaza is intolerable. It goes on to note that the heinous attack, Israel had a right to defend, or after the heinous attack, Israel had a right to defend Israelis against terrorism, but this escalation is wholly disproportionate. And the president of the European Council, Antonio Costa, has called the crisis in Gaza, quote, a tragedy where international law is being systemically violated and an entire population is being subjected to disproportionate military force. He goes on, there must be safe, swift, and unimpeded access for humanitarian aid. The article goes on to quote a senior European diplomat, noting that the tough language reflects, quote, a real sense of growing political anger at the humanitarian situation of a line being crossed and of this Israeli government appearing to act with impunity. And then the article goes on, most ominously for Israel, the statement continues, quote, we will not stand by while the Netanyahu government pursues these egregious actions. If Israel does not cease the renewed military offensive and lift its restrictions on humanitarian aid, we will take further concrete steps in response. So, any comments on that?
Yeah. I just wanted to ask you, have you ever noticed any sort of statements by any of these countries on seeing how these humanitarian aid trucks were looted by this Hamas and were used by this Hamas for generating their own money? They were selling this aid, food and other items. They were selling them to the Gazan people and were literally giving them nothing. And even some of these people, the Gazans, were protesting against them. And how they were handled by this Hamas was that they were simply shot at point blank. So, on seeing these multiple instances previously, have you ever noticed any comment by any of these countries or any condemnation by any official bodies or UN?
This article didn't mention that. I'm sure there have been, but
Not
that's an argument from
anything
ignorance.
before?
So I haven't been. I don't. It's not like I troll the news looking for people condemning Hamas and their
So,
actions.
yeah, so isn't there a complacency among all these countries when an action which comes from the Hamas, which is literally giving a miserable option to the Gazan people, is being ignored in a way that they are led to do that again and again. And at the same time, when Israel or any of these countries which identifies the problem and they try to solve that by modifying the way that humanitarian aid is supplied, maybe it will take time. Maybe like now it has almost taken 3 months of blockade, we call. And in that way, criticizing the blockade, irrespective of not criticizing what led to this blockade or what led to do this in this way to stop the looting of the humanitarian aid by the Hamas and letting the Gazan people suffer for not able to get the humanitarian aid. So don't you think that way?
Well, yeah. If there's more to the story, then yeah, there should be something going on. But neither you nor I are there. Both of us are getting our information secondhand.
But
Whether we trust the sources that are telling us this, I don't know.
if you can trust the sources which you read out, I can trust the sources which I can also read from the same news
Okay,
bulletins.
so even if Hamas has been abusing the aid, does that mean that Israel should just shut it off so that
They didn't shut
the
it off.
people have
They
to
were
suffer?
trying to solve the problem and they were trying to bring about a new mechanism whereby they will completely avoid the Hamas people from being the middlemen, and they will distribute the humanitarian aid by themselves, giving the access to the Gazan people directly. So isn't that good?
Yeah, that's good, but it's
Yeah.
also it's another lever of control that they can wield. That hey, behave or
Obviously,
we'll cut off the aid. Yeah,
to stop the humanitarian aid
yeah, but
being
but
misused, and
humanitarian aid should not be weaponized, should it?
that applies to Hamas as well. It is a
Yeah, of
humanitarian
course.
aid. It is not something which you can sell to the people, which is
Yeah.
supposed to be given free.
Well, the whole area
Okay.
is a complete
So,
shit show. So
so you cannot compare both. That's what I'm saying. It's like you are stopping a robbery, a loot, and you are trying to overcome that problem, and you are just saying that stopping that loot is a bigger crime than letting that loot to continue. How come that be equated in that way?
yeah, well, as I said, the whole thing is a shit show. So,
Yeah.
and I
So
don't think
let's wait for the
no
complete
no one
story. That's what I would
no
say.
one no one's getting yeah nobody's
We
getting the
have
complete picture.
I just wanted to make a point here that is we have to look at both ways instead of just accusing some country randomly or right now we have Israel at the finger point always, and we are always trying to criticize them irrespective of the reasons or irrespective of the real things that they are trying to do or to overcome. let's forget about the history because we have enough told about that, or we have discussed many things about that. But right now, when humanitarian aid, if you are against weaponizing it, I'm against selling the humanitarian aid to the same
Yeah.
people to
Well,
whom
that's disgraceful.
it should reach freely. So they are stopping that, and they are trying to use that, monetize those humanitarian aid for their own purposes, for especially for building the tunnels, and to buy more weapons, and to keep the hostages. So let the hostages be let free and let the war end. Why don't we talk about that?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay,
And
so
what's
that's
your story for today?
yeah. This is something which can be connected to the same thing, which is a protest that has now erupted, a continued protest which is now happening in the Gazan region by the Gazan people against the Hamas on orders of IDF to evacuate Khan Yunis when IDF made a notice that that's the new combat zone. So more attacks will be there, more airstrikes, and more bunker bursting, the tunnel bursting will happen over there. And for that reason, when that was announced, instead of protesting against the idea for giving such a combat notification, the Gazans, they are now turning against the Hamas people, and they are asking them to free the hostages and please end the war. That's how they're coming up. That's the protest headlines that they are using. And the biggest difference when compared to the previous protests is that the number of protesters is ever more increasing than it was before. And that's a good sign that Hamas is losing ground, and people in the Gazan region itself, they are realizing the problem. And there were some calls by some of the sympathizers of the Hamas by saying that even if one of my children dies, I can give birth to more, and our children are therefore to die more and more. These were the kind of slogans that they used to put forward in the previous fighting time and all. But right now, what we are hearing from the Gazan region is that our children should live. Our children is not to die. So these are the change, the shift, the paradigm shift in the slogans. That's what we are seeing right now from the Gazan region. So the protests are yet to come, and this is just, I would say, the second spell of the protest that is happening in this Gazan region, and we expect more of that to happen in the future, and that will give even the IDF and the Israel to focus on their area of dismantling the terror infrastructure of Hamas and to end this war as early as possible, including the liberation of the hostages who are still trapped in the dungeons in the Gaza. This is one thing which I would like to share right now.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a good sign that the Gaza people. So I mean, Hamas
coming
is
more.
their days are numbered. So between
Yeah,
their people, between Israel, they're done.
mm,
It's just a matter.
yeah.
It's only a matter of time. So
Yeah, or do you remember about a statement made by Mahmoud Abbas regarding the Hamas, and he called the Hamas as the son
yeah,
of
you
the
mentioned.
dogs? I think we
Yeah,
discussed this
you
last week.
talked about that a few weeks ago. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is just a continuation of that, because when we fail to understand, or we fail to realize and address the real issues, which is now posed by the Hamas as a terrorist organization which masquerade as a freedom fighter, the real issue is that they are leading the people to misery, unending misery, eternal misery. That's what we are seeing in Gazan region, and at least now the people are realizing that. At least some the rulers or the authorities in the West Bank, they are realizing that, and they are now openly calling for the end of the war. And the first step for ending the war is to free the hostages, and they are now openly calling for such a thing in Gazan region itself. And this was one thing which we always criticized in the beginning, that none of the Gazans ever asked for the freeing of the hostages. But right now we are even listening to that. That's a good sign.
Indeed.
Yeah. So let's hope for the
Okay.
best.
Yeah. Okay. So a quick one tonight. So yeah, just a couple of
Yeah.
news items. We've been off the
Mm.
last couple of weeks. Hussein was traveling, so a
Yeah.
little bit of a jet set. So, but we're back. So
Sure.
okay, great.
Okay.
Well, it's going to be a quick one tonight. So we'll sign off here, and we'll see. Most likely, we'll see everybody next week, unless more shit comes up. But anyway, so
Okay.
thanks for tuning in, and we'll see everybody next time. Take care.
Take care. Bye bye.
Bye bye.